you for joining us today to celebrate the launch of the Bard Microcollege for Just Community Leadership, a partnership of College and Community Fellowship, Just Leadership USA, and the Bard Prison Initiative. Welcome, we're so excited that you're here joining us. Before we hear from our panelists, I want to invite you, those of you joining from all over the country and beyond, to join the virtual conversation. We're streaming here live on YouTube as well as on Facebook and Twitter. And so please share your comments, where you're joining from, your connection, what brought you here today, and any questions in the feeds of wherever you're joining from. And you can boost the conversation with the hashtag Bard Microcollege. So we'll get to your questions and any comments following hearing from our panelists. And we're just so grateful that you're here today to celebrate with us. It's my honor to introduce Craig Wilder. Craig Stephen Wilder is a historian of American institutions and ideas and professor of history at MIT, distinguished fellow at the Bard Prison Initiative. Craig began his career as a community organizer in the South Bronx and spent over a decade researching the deep connections between race, slavery, and American universities. The result was his book, Ebony and Ivy: Race, Slavery, and the Troubled History of America's Universities. Craig, we're just so excited to have you here today to help moderate the discussion, introduce our panelists, and have a really engaged conversation. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you. I'm really glad to join you. This is, for me, the third time that I've had the opportunity to help Bard or join Bard as it introduced a new microcollege. And I'm delighted to actually be involved in this new endeavor. I'm going to introduce the three panelists, or actually invite them onto the stage to introduce themselves. First, DeAnna Hoskins from Just Leadership.
Thanks, Craig, and everyone who's joining us today. I'm DeAnna Hoskins, President CEO of Just Leadership USA. Just Leadership is a national nonprofit that is founded by and led by individuals directly impacted by the criminal justice system. We're dedicated to cutting the correctional population in half by educating, empowering, and elevating the voices of those most impacted to drive the types of policy reforms within their communities that actually disrupt the systemic oppression and marginalization of those individuals. And it's an honor to be here.
Thank you, DeAnna. It's an honor to have you here. And I'm going to bring Max Kenner to the stage now from the Bard Prison Initiative.
Thank you, Craig, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Max Kenner. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Bard Prison Initiative. Since 1999, BPI has been a leader in restoring college opportunity within prison systems across the United States. We enroll over 300 students full-time here in New York and are engaged in the issue nationwide. 5 years ago, we established, as Craig mentioned, the first microcollege, an expansion of our mission beyond the prison system to create full-time, tuition-free college opportunity in community-based settings, building off terrific partnerships. And there is no partnership we're more proud of than this one that we're launching today, and excited to turn it over to my friend, Vivian Nixon.
Let's bring Vivian to the stage. You're muted. No, you're good. We can hear you.
Thank you, Max and Craig and DeAnna, for being part of this wonderful partnership. Thank you to all of you who are listening across the country and who care about this issue. This is a culmination of 20 years of work that I have been doing with College and Community Fellowship, starting at CCF as a student when I was released from prison. We dreamed of helping women get college degrees, but furthermore dreamed of increasing access for everyone. And a partnership with Bard began very early on, nearly 20 years ago, and with Just Leadership, the founding of Just Leadership. So there could be no better three organizations to come together, provide free college to people in the communities most harmed by incarceration. College and Community Fellowship will be offering an array of services to all of the directly impacted women who participate in the microcollege. It is a dream come true. One of our biggest issues has been financing college for our students. So there could not a better time. Thank you for all your support. Continue to support. Listen up and you'll hear the details. And I'm ready to roll. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Vivian. You're always hard act to follow, but I'm going to try and keep up with you today because the microcolleges deserve it. I'm going to actually turn to Max first. And Max, why don't we actually do some of the details of what the microcolleges are? And why don't you start by just giving a quick history of them?
Sure. So the history, of course, begins with our decade and a half history of doing college in prison before we established the first microcollege. And without being flip, I would say that one thing that inspired us to create the microcolleges was people's general amazement at the success of our students in the classroom, their intellectual curiosity, their extreme levels of ambition, and ability to thrive in history, math, science, history of art, creation of art, you name it. And we found that astonishment provocative, sometimes insulting. Another way of telling the story is we got tired of being the butt of jokes of which the punchline was something about a captive audience. People like to explain their own bigotry away somehow through the prism, right? So we decided, after so many years of watching students succeed so remarkably, that we had to do more. And we had to move outside of the prison setting. So we began establishing partnerships with community-based institutions. First, the Care Center in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which provides a whole array of extraordinary services to young mothers, women, in the Pioneer Valley in Holyoke, Massachusetts, then at Brooklyn Public Library, and now with Just Leadership and CCF. And what the microcolleges are, in some ways, are simply BPI without the prison. In a library, in a community center, an opportunity for cohorts of driven, terrific students, typically of an older age, but not only, students of any age, returning to school to engage in the kind of education that in the United States is typically reserved to the children of the lucky, the privileged, or the rich.
Max, can you do me a favor? Just repeat that last part about who the microcolleges are for. I don't want the audience to have any misunderstandings about who we're recruiting.
Sure. Every microcollege targets a slightly different population. We do ask applicants to fill out a FAFSA. We're not interested in providing tuition-free college for people who would otherwise be paying to go to Stanford or the University of Chicago, of course. But microcolleges are for any person who has not had the opportunity to go to college, whose education has been deterred, and has an interest in expanding their intellectual horizons, and in this instance, creating the broad foundation for a career in advocacy or social change.
Thank you, Max. And I want to turn to Vivian Nixon for a minute. And Vivian, the question I want to bring to you is really, can you just tell the audience about how this partnership came together? I know that the three of you and these organizations have worked together for a long time, but where did this idea come from? And what was the process in bringing it to reality?
One of the things that College and Community Fellowship has always focused on connecting women coming out of the justice system college is the tuition issue. Many had started college in prison. Coming out, it was not the same support. And taking out student loans can cause long-term problems for people, especially with predatory loan process that is in existence. And we found that our students needed concentrated help with navigating the financial systems, navigating the academic systems. And I started having these conversations with Max because some of the students from BPI, some of the female students from BPI were getting released having not graduated yet. So they were needing the same types of supports that CCF offers. So one night, probably daytime version, over dinner, we were having a chat and we were like, well, why can't we do something together? Why can't we offer college, not just to those who have been in prison or who have criminal convictions, but in the communities where mass incarceration has had a deep impact? You're, of course, going to attract people who have that direct experience. And for those folks, you can provide extra services that CCF provides, the opportunities that Just Leadership provides to open up. We early on said who could be another partner, and Just Leadership was the first thing out of both of our mouths. And so we just began to bring DeAnna into the conversation, start making visits as a trio to funders, and Max really took the lead. We couldn't say no when he came to us and said, okay, there is no more excuse. I have found someone to really give us a solid start. And we couldn't say no. It's just too good of an offer for our community. I'm just overjoyed with excitement to be able to do it.
One of the beautiful things about the combination of the College and Community Foundation, Just Leadership, and BPI is that the three organizations really do fit together beautifully, particularly on this project. And DeAnna, I want to turn to you for a minute just to talk about the particular focus of this microcollege, the advocacy focus, and what that actually promises to the students who are going to be coming into those classrooms.
Thank you, Craig. For me, as Vivian said, when her and Max brought me this idea, it made all the sense in the world. As you know, Just Leadership, while our focus, we were founded on the premises of training formerly incarcerated people to elevate their voice to demand change. One of the examples that we utilized when people are empowered is the Close Rikers campaign. And from the Close Rikers campaign, the momentum built, but there also was a companion piece that was built to the Close Rikers campaign to say, from a community's perspective, these are the things we need in our communities that have been most harmed by Rikers Island, which is our Build Communities platform. Within that platform, individuals from those communities actually spoke about we need opportunities around public health, employment, but they also talked about education and increasing access to higher education. And as Vivian said, and Max said about individuals who have the ability and the resources to attend traditional college are not the people who have been most impacted all the time. And for me, it made sense when I was walking through Harlem and I was looking at the gentrification that was going on. New York City has the biggest and largest public housing in the country. And it felt as if individuals from those marginalized communities, the public housing buildings, were not welcomed into that community. So how do you bring something to the community that's for them, that's focused on them, instead of being a more traditional college where they may not fit in? One of the elements of Just Leadership is we lead with our personal experience, our expertise. And personally, when I was returning to college, I was intimidated by the more traditional, larger college. And it was a community-based, community-focused college, 2-year liberal arts that got me going, that I was able to start walking on those bigger campuses. But that initial cohort method, that actual small setting, and those resources that were provided when I did encounter those barriers actually is what gave me the momentum to be able to sit in the seat that I'm sitting in today, because it was a college that came to the level in the community that I needed access to. So I knew personally, when they started talking about it, I knew personally the impact that this college would bring to individuals who had a desire to return to college.
And so you actually have this extraordinary combination of organizations that have actually established both regional and national expertise around advocacy, around questions of de-incarceration, and reversing mass incarceration, providing services to communities, actually coming into combination with an organization that has actually developed a kind of peculiar model for delivering high quality liberal arts education in environments and sites where we don't expect to see it. And my relationship to Bard began, I believe, Max, you can correct me if I'm wrong, about 14 or 15 years ago, And it was a very sort of casual introduction, and I got hooked really quickly. And I got hooked because I'm a teacher. And I was deeply impressed with the fact that Bard could deliver a high quality liberal arts education inside a correctional facility. I am equally impressed that Bard can actually make that model mobile and transport it to communities where it's been denied. And so let's talk about that some in the context of the Harlem project. The curriculum that the students are coming into is a curriculum that's heavily focused on the liberal arts. And Max, can I come to you first and we can talk about what that means?
Of course. So the curriculum is designed to do two things in the Microcollege at Harlem. It will invite students to the full world of a liberal arts education that's offered on campuses like Bard's across the globe to, again, young people that are lucky and entitled, but share the legacy of the arts, of the sciences, of our shared history with everyone, because it belongs to everyone. Our view is the idea that that is somehow the purview only of the elite is ridiculous. So it'll share what we do conventionally, but it will do something else also. It will bring the experience of formerly incarcerated faculty. It will focus on community-centered issues and solutions, and train people for careers and a life of thinking about social change, but with a broad foundation, with an emphasis on teaching people to write, with an emphasis on helping people understand the historical context in which they are living and working, and not exclusively sort of the vocational skills, for lack of a better term, that one might think of if they were, just simply applying for a job. So it's important to think about the curriculum doing both of those things at once, something specific and unusual, but also something broad and classical.
Well, Max, there's always a difference between the education we plan for people and the educations they imagine for themselves. And the latter is what the liberal arts are. Right? I mentioned that I got hooked on BPI. I got hooked on BPI because no matter where a person is, I think you have a right to access the highest quality education that the nation can afford. And you have a right to the chance to transform your life and the circumstances of your life. And the microcolleges provide that. This microcollege in particular provides something else. And I want to turn to Vivian and DeAnna for a moment, because you for quite some time, you've actually led really quite significant organizations that, as has been pointed out already, have been at the forefront of advocacy campaigns that the audience is going to know well. Advocacy is a part of this focus. And what does that mean to you when you came into that partnership? How did the advocacy focus of this college actually help to make it very clear that you had to participate?
So I'll start out first. I think for Just Leadership, one of the things that we realized while we were training people in advocacy and organizing one-on-one, that there still was a deeper understanding of how policy takes place, how policy plays out in marginalized communities than the way they're written, and how do we start exposing people to that? So for Just Leadership is really being a partner in this micro college is around how do we give people access to understand how policy works, how you connect with elected officials. Advocacy has many legs to it. Most people think about advocacy and organizing of, we're going to organize, we're going to get a crowd of people, we're going to have a bullhorn, but that's the outside game. There's an inside game as well. And somebody has to know how to sit at the table to talk about the policies, even write the policy and bring the policy to elected officials. That's one of the misconceptions that most people who are advocating for policy change always think elected officials always brings the policy forward. And I always tell people, advocates bring the recommendation. The legislative office drafts it in legislative form, but it is the advocate's recommendation that some champion who is an elected official, has picked up, but actually giving people a thorough understanding of that. So we knew from Just Leadership, we could do advocacy and training, organizing one-on-one, but how do we actually tap into the educational needs and understanding of that and partner with this project that people can work or do internships with Just Leadership to actually start to really understand the various stages, and that you don't have to be at an advocacy organization to be an advocate. You can work in federal government and be an advocate from the inside out. So really understanding that advocacy is just not about being in the streets. There are many legs that advocacy has, and how do we start to expose you to that? So for us, we knew it needed to go a little deeper to actually educate individuals and give them the opportunity, but also give them some experience of working with Just Leadership as we work around this nationally.
And so one of the aims for your organization and for you personally is to really actually empower students.
Yes.
To understand that whole framework and that whole relationship between policy, advocacy, the broadest social questions that actually face the nation today.
Exactly.
Thank you. And Vivian?
Yes, so for CCS, there's a very related goal. We start at the point of kind of a clean slate as it pertains to a person's vision of their lives and dreams and their goals. One of the first things we try to get students to do is imagine that you had never had this interruption in your life, whether it was prison or probation or parole or alternative to incarceration. What did you see your life being? What was your dream? And it may evolve and change over time. The foundation that a liberal arts education gives, in connection with understanding of how policy and advocacy works, is a range of opportunities for people to choose. Yes, I do want to be an advocate, but I don't necessarily want to focus on policing, because I believe that there's another issue that is also very directly related to issues of criminal justice, issues like housing, education, or even the way licensure and careers are structured. There is so much out there. The arts, for instance. I mean, we are going to be across the street from the Schomburg. You know, when I think about the days when people were sitting around the table at the Schomburg, heads down, when I think of Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, Sonia Sanchez, these are my heroes. They too had not been welcomed into the mainstream of education and had to create their own spaces to think and write. They ended up being in the streets advocating for change, advocating for our country to be less rooted in systemic racism. Their love was the arts. It didn't make their advocacy ineffective. It made it more effective. In the long run, it did impact all social policy as it pertains to especially people of color in this country. So as DeAnna said, open up what the world of advocacy looks like, not just in terms of how you do it, but what the subject matter is. You know, we've been advocating for Pell Grants for years, and we're so glad that we have crossed that particular barrier. We want students to pick their own issues that they care about, but to have the basic foundations follow through with the dreams for their families and their communities.
Thank you, Vivian. That's actually so perfectly put. I can't actually even add. I once sat in a class with a BPI student who asked me, as class was beginning, if I was going to write about BPI, and my response to him was, I come here to make sure you write about your lives and you actually speak your own truths. You don't need me to do that for you. In fact, college at its best starts to fade away as we get older, but the person remains. You know, that's the beauty of the liberal arts, that's the beauty of education. We keep it and we run with it long after we've left those college classrooms. I'm just going to do a quick reminder to the audience to drop any questions for the panel into the comment section for the upcoming question and answer portion of the program. So anything that you have to ask the panelists, please drop it into the comment section now. and we'll return to that. Vivian, one of the things that you pointed out was it's right, the new site is right across the street from the Schomburg, which warms my heart. I'm sitting in the middle of Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn right now, and when I got to my rebellious period at 13, 14, I used to take the train to the Schomburg and disappear all day long. And I would come back to my house when my mother would question me, and I would tell wild tales of what I did all day long. But I sat at the Schomburg, to be honest. It's one of my favorite places, and it leads actually perfectly to the next question. Why Harlem for this project?
Rich history of Black intellectualism, Black arts, and Black activism. It's all here. It couldn't be a more perfect spot. I'm actually teaching a class right now on the Black arts movement and the power that came out of that. These were not, mamsy-pamsy artists writing love poems. I mean, they were going after power structures of the day and using art to do it. Now, I don't think there could be a better place, because the remnants of that period in our history are still here in Harlem, despite the gentrification. This may just reinvigorate a widening of the spirit that is left of all those people that we have elevated in our history and that we honor, and many of whom have left us, and we owe it to their legacy to create that next generation of brilliant thinkers, advocates who are going to carry on the legacy that Harlem is a center of Black culture, Black intellect, and Black power.
I want to follow up on that for Vivian. As I was saying, walking through Harlem and not being a native New Yorker, but every time I would walk down 125th Street or Frederick Douglass, you could just feel as the culture and the history that's there. And I think it was solidified for me sitting in Mr. Harry Belafonte's house, having this conversation about this college and just looking around at the pictures, the art, and remembering his activism and different things. It made so much sense to be at the center of what I consider Black excellence that has come out of this country. While there have been singers, actors, they all had a core of advocacy within the work that they did. And even at his age, he's still truly an advocate. So it just made all the sense in the world to me once it was solidified with that visit to his home in Harlem, that Harlem had to be the place that this microcollege was launched.
And I'll just point out for the audience that along the journey to bringing this microcollege to life, we actually got the inspirational support of Harry Belafonte. And perhaps no one, Vivian, captures that marriage of the arts, radical advocacy, the struggle for liberation, and an understanding that, in fact, the project of really giving people the opportunity to fulfill their destinies is far from done. There's a lot of work to be done. And what's so extraordinary about Mr. Belafonte is that, as DeAnna put it, even at his age, he wakes up every day to do that work. And it's that work that actually gives him life. Max, I'm going to turn to you also to give you a chance to talk about the why Harlem question.
Sure. So for us at Bard and BPI, we aspire to put a tuition-free microcollege in every borough in the coming years. And this is a special one because of the long connection between these three organizations. And part of the reason for us to go to Harlem was simply because Just Leadership and CCF were there. But in addition to that, not to be flip, the proximity to public housing that DeAnna referred to is essentially important. But in every microcollege partnership, we seek to share the existing public, free, at no cost, wealth of New York City with people who, for whatever reason, feel isolated or excluded from it. And when we think of what exists in Harlem, and particularly this part of Harlem, across from the Schomburg, down the block from the Abyssinian, up the avenue from the Studio Museum, there is an extraordinary wealth of culture and history and engagement that, as educators, is at our disposal to invite people to and make it theirs for generations to come. So I can't imagine a better place than the place we're at. And I do want to just shout out the New York Public Library, County Cullen Branch, and Tony Marks for inviting us to do this with them in their house as well.
Well, and Max, I'm glad you actually made that final comment, because I think that also adds to one more thing or touches on one more thing I want you to talk about, all of you to talk about, which is, it's easy to talk about, and we often talk about Harlem in the past tense. The Renaissance Harlem and the Harlem of the Civil Rights Movement, the Black New York of the 20th century rather than the New York of the 21st century. And in many ways, the Microcollege is actually bringing our attention to the New York of the 21st century. And I want to ask you all what your vision for this college is. If you actually had your druthers, what are you achieving with this step? And what are your organizations actually, what's the future you're seeking to build by putting your resources, your time, and your moral and emotional energy into this project?
It will become an educational center where people can actually get associate's degree, also be seen as a resource for the whole community at a multi-generational level, where young people can come and learn, where older people can share their experiences, and where we can marry the richness of our past here in this community to the brilliance that is sitting right in front of us in people who are still here, legacy for the future. This cannot be disappeared. It cannot melt away. It cannot fade into the sunset of history as if it didn't exist. I was watching a YouTube, there are these two really young guys who have a YouTube channel where they listen to old music they had never heard before. They react to it in real time they're listening to it for the very first time. They've never heard it before. And yesterday I was watching them listen to Nina Simone sing, "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free." And they were listening so intently, and they were like, wow, I wonder how it felt way back then in 1976. And I'm like, way back then? So we have got to get people beyond 1976 to realize that there's a rich history before that. And I think that's a gift to Harlem, to create this center of education. It is, yes, about getting people these associate's degrees. I can see more opportunity to offer public programming on occasion, expands and inspires people to dig deeper, to learn more about their history, the beautiful legacy of Black people in this country. Because it's not all about slavery and oppression. We have left a beautiful legacy in this country. We need to spread that news.
And Vivian, even the story of slavery and legacy is part of the, sort of beautiful tradition that we've brought to the country, right? We've rescued that story. And Max, I'm sorry, you were going to.
Yeah, just to say, there are a lot of ways to answer that question, Craig, but there are two things that I think are really important to share this afternoon. The first is we came together because we want to deploy in a new context the lessons of 20 and 25 years of work in so-called criminal justice reform. And the landscape is changing, but the fundamentals in many ways have not. And we want to move that history and that legacy that we've all been a part of into the future. And as we do that, the second goal that I think is really important to DeAnna and Vivian and me and everyone at our organizations is we hope this college becomes a hub for learning, thinking, and teaching for our community citywide, for formerly incarcerated people, for advocates, for formerly incarcerated faculty, thinkers, intellectuals, artists. This can become a home and a center where people, not just the undergraduates enrolled there, but others as well, to give lectures, to have meals, to be together and think and aspire to improve the work that we all do every day.
And I'll close up. I think sometimes when individuals are privileged or a college is an automatic next step, don't understand the empowerment of people who may not have been readily privileged to that, of what education gives a person. It opens up a world of possibility. It opens up a world of opportunities. But I also look at, dealing with the criminal justice system or people who've been impacted and marginalized. I always say we're fighting for clean slate. We're fighting for access around licensures and employment. But your education is the one thing no law can take away from you. Once you have it, it is yours. You own that. And the empowerment that education gives individuals, it starts to change generation after generation. When one person gets a college degree, other family members start to see that and get the encouragement and the support to go on. So to be in the middle of Harlem, to be exactly where we're situated, close to public housing, actually starts to break down the barriers around lack or access to education for generations to come. And that's, like Vivian said, this can't be something that goes away. This has the ability to change what Harlem currently looks like, to bring back some of the historical aspect, advocacy, and just actual cultural element to it. So I'm really excited about that.
When we had our meeting with Harry Belafonte, one of the things I remembered was his passion for taking some of the innovations of the past and applying them to the realities of the present. And all of you in a different way have described that in your sort of expectations and hopes for the microcollege. In particular, rebuilding that intellectual community, that intergenerational intellectual community that existed and thrived in Black and brown neighborhoods for decades and decades and across generations. I want to, go back to that in particular, because one of the things you talked about, Max, was coming back to the public library. And I'll also give a shout out to Tony Marks for that and the New York Public Library system. And with a really dull story. I learned to use microfilm at the Schomburg. And the man who helped me, I think I was like 14 years old, the man who helped me do it, a guy saw me struggling with it. He came over and helped me do it. He was in a suit and tie and he left. And then later on, one of the librarians explained to me who that was. And it was this sort of really quite famous Black historian. And I remember just thinking about the Schomburg differently from that moment on. It was a place where actually an intergenerational exchange happened all the time. But in Harlem and across New York and across the United States, Black and brown communities also did that with that work with public libraries. Public libraries were instrumental. They were actually important sites of learning, advocacy, politics. So Max, can you talk some about the importance of, you've done this with the Brooklyn Project, of now returning again to the public library as an institution for situating a college?
Of course. Well, probably everybody watching right now understands full well, Craig, that without knowing exactly how old you are, that since you were 14, we've put a lot of effort in the United States into destroying and dismantling things like public libraries, things like colleges, access, not just to education in the formal way, but the sense that, again, our history and culture belongs to everyone and should be accessible to everyone. And in the last decade or so, there's been an extraordinary renaissance of the public library. Lots of people deserve credit for that. Brooklyn Public Library and New York Public Library have definitely helped lead the way. But I think what we have to do, and the public libraries have done a terrific job of this, is that view that crisis, view that dismantling, not just as the tragedy that it was, but as an opportunity for today. Because as we rebuild these institutions, we can make the landscape of the university and the landscape of the country more inviting, more democratic, and more rich than it was even before it began being destroyed in the 1970s and 80s.
And Max, that decades-long attack on the public sphere has also been an assault on the institutional foundations that communities use to do grassroots organizing. And so I'm really quite delighted to see the public library. And you're right, across the United States, public libraries have actually been responding to urban crises for decades. And I love the idea of this new partnership and the way in which both the library and the college are actually adding to each other's prestige and reemergence within the community. We now need to turn to our Q&A, and I'm going to look to see what the first question coming up is, which I haven't received. Oh, here it comes. As soon as I said that, it arrived magically. So, Max and DeAnna, Vivian, the first question from the audience is this an in-person only opportunity for New York-based folks? So let's actually do that two-part. Is this in-person only, and is it only for New York-based folks?
While we may be remote for the summer and fall semesters, because for obvious reasons, yes, this is an education that is designed to be in person, faculty to student, and students as a community together.
And Max, is it New York based?
This is based in Harlem, in person.
Or New York based folks? Is it limited to people?
No,
living?
if you live in a different state and you can get there every day, that's your business.
Okay, right. We'd love to have you. And
we'd love to have you.
Why don't you very quickly remind everyone of the? Have we pointed out the whole process for applying?
So this is very important. Everyone watching, if you have friends who might be terrific applicants or friends who might have access to people who might be terrific applicants, we encourage everyone to apply. It's a simple process that's with as little bureaucracy as possible. And as you can see at the bottom of your screen, just go to bard.microcollege.edu and you'll very easily move your way to a very painless little bit of form, and we will follow up with you in a human touch, dignified way.
And Max, I can just say, as someone who's taught, at least guest lectured in the microcolleges before, one of my favorite parts of that is that it reproduces a great aspect of the traditional college campus, in that the students coming in each year form a real cohort, an intellectual community. They're an extraordinarily supportive group. And you could see that dynamic form very early in the process. And so not only do I encourage people to apply because this is high quality education and it's accessible, I also encourage them to apply, to drop their fears of applying to college, because that's precisely what this is intended to address. It's intended to empower them to actually make that step. The next question actually comes from Gabriel, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Can New Yorkers seek admission at both this new microcollege and the Brooklyn Public Library Microcollege? Meaning, I assume that means, can you go to both?
You can't go to both, but you can go to either. So as you're applying, you can apply to both. You can enroll at either or be invited to enroll at either. And, there are two fundamental differences between the two. The first is obviously location. If you live or spend time proximate to Grand Army Plaza or Harlem, one might be a better fit in that way. And then there is a curricular distinction in that at the Harlem Microcollege, the Bard Microcollege for Just Community Leadership, we will have this curricular focus on the history of community engagement, mass incarceration, and social change, which is in no ways absent from the curriculum in Brooklyn, but there might be more of a focus on literature and the arts and the breadth of the liberal arts in Brooklyn, as opposed to in Harlem, where we do have this particular focus.
And in fact, the second part of the question was about how to choose between the two if you're not able to apply to both. Applying to both, I don't think would help. I actually think you're absolutely right. It really is about engaging with an intellectual community and an intellectual project. The next question is, where are the faculty recruited from?
Well, the bulk of the faculty recruitment will be done combination by us at BPI and people who've taught at the microcolleges in the prisons on Bard's campus. And I'm thrilled that Craig Wilder and Vivian Nixon and DeAnna Hoskins will be recruiting faculty alongside us. And it will be an extraordinary and unique college faculty, again, that blends classical, rigorous liberal arts education with something contemporary and cutting edge, focused on the experience of mass incarceration.
Well, I'm going to take a little privilege here and just reverse the next two questions. For locals, and actually Vivian and DeAnna, in particular, I'd like you to address this question. For locals, it begins, how can we actually best support and connect to this project, this endeavor?
Well, the first point of entry is the Microcollege website, which has on it, I believe, not only information for students, but information for those who want to support the partnership. We work in tandem together. You could also go to collegeandcommunityfellowship.org or to jlusa.org and specify that you want more information about our work with the microcollege. If there's something specific you want to support or build upon, we'd be happy to ask your question. We are seeing this as an equal partnership, and we'd love to have conversations with anyone who wants to support the work as a whole, and those who want to focus on an element of the work, the synergies that make it a team.
And so on the microcollege website that's being shown at the bottom of the screen, they can also find a link for supporting the microcolleges and the BPI projects. And I encourage people to not just visit that site and visit that link, but also to really take a look at the breadth of educational work that's being done and the success of those educational projects. I also encourage you to visit the websites of Just Leadership and the College and Community Fellowship to really understand in 3 dimensions how this work is being achieved on this campus. The second question that I had was actually, how are tuition and other costs covered if the microcolleges are free?
I'll take that one quickly. First of all, the idea of the microcollege, the concept, is about spreading the responsibility and spreading the cost among partners with shared values, but disparate missions, right? So we, CCF, we Just Leadership, we Bard, we the Public Library, are spreading the costs and responsibilities among us, number one. And number two, the foundation, the ballast, is through federal Pell Grants and TAP grants, though if you're undocumented or you have debt or otherwise ineligible for Pell, please don't consider that when you're thinking about applying. It's not something we take into consideration. And then we are funded philanthropically. So we assume the burden of putting together the rest of the costs, not just for tuition, but also for books and any school supplies. And we raise that money through foundations, individual donors, any way we can to create tuition-free college opportunity.
And Max, I'm just going to tag on to that another answer to Mike's question, which was about where the faculty are recruited from. Just to remind Mike that actually one of the great things about these projects is that the faculty are pretty much the same faculty you would find on campus. And the aim is to deliver the same education that you would find on campus. In fact, one of the reasons I found BPI kind of irresistible, and I tried to resist, right, was that its commitment to delivering the highest quality liberal arts education to every person who sat in a chair, in a desk, in a classroom, no matter what that person's background was. And I used to blame Max for, being extraordinarily convincing. He could get me to do things that I hadn't intended to do. But the reality is that, Vivian, DeAnna, Max, what you're doing is actually just getting us to do what's right and what's just. The next question comes from Jenny, and it's, what do you envision the impact of the pandemic and the post-pandemic recovery will be on the microcollege and the launch?
Max, you want to take that?
That's a hard one to answer, but it may mean we do not start in person in precisely the same way. But I think it's worth pivoting to, just as we wrap up this conversation, how we got here, which is that we've been doing this decarceration thing for a long time. And I don't want to put DeAnna out of business, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves or, do a dance in the end zone. But we're winning. Mm-hmm. But just because we're winning doesn't mean racism has gone away, poverty has gone away, that education is accessible, the things that make lives better are available to people. So as we pivot away from the COVID moment, let's also think about how we, and this is why I love Just Leadership and its Build Communities campaign, not just how we make things less bad, but how we build institutions that actually make our friends and our communities' lives more meaningful, more rich, more fulfilling.
Right. And I want to close out, follow Max on that one, because what we are in the criminal justice system is a catch-all to the other failed systems. And when Max mentioned the Build Communities platform, it's about investing to build communities that are thriving, that are holistic, and that have the resources that are necessary to heal itself, that we don't have to become so dependent on the criminal justice system to correct or overinvest in a law enforcement manner. So for me, what Just Leadership brings, and I want to go back to the question of how people can support, also, it's not always around finances. People's time, talent, and opportunity are greatly appreciated so that we can expand individuals' access around this as they get educational opportunities. But again, the most important thing is how Max said, how we got here. This is about building communities that are thriving, and the Just Leadership's Build Community platform, the community call for investment in higher education opportunities, and this is the first step out of that plan.
And I'm going to ask Vivian Nixon to give us a final word. And just before you do, I want to just underscore what Max and DeAnna just said. I think all of the people on this screen, no matter what our titles are not actually traditional students in a lot of ways. I know I'm not. And you can give me a fancy title and put MIT next to it, and people seem to be relatively impressed. But that's not my origin story. And college was as uncomfortable for me as it was for many people. I get that part. And I think, one of the great things about this project is we're now bringing, in fact, that education to people. We're taking down the walls, we're taking down the barriers and bringing it to them in a way that's both empowering and uplifting and has promise for the communities that they live in. And I'm going to turn to the final word to Vivian Nixon.
I think one of the roles of education is to provide people with a vision for their lives, with hope, with inspiration. People have those things, they don't keep them to themselves. That hope leaks out to their families, to their communities, to our society. What we hope to facilitate with this partnership is to have people see within themselves greatness of interaction with the world's history, world's current challenges, and the innovation that can change the world for the future. We want to provide it to a group of people that has been locked out of that opportunity for many years and for many, many reasons. We want to make it less intimidating, less frightening, less different than what they're familiar with. Spaces where people have similar stories to tell, where they can identify with the first time they walked into a huge institution and felt intimidated. Teachers who may have experienced incarceration or some other element of the criminal justice system are no less qualified because of that. That inspires those who have been marginalized to say, I can overcome whatever disadvantages might have come my way, connecting with these people who have done that thing. And together, we can attack the bigger problems, structural racism, the systemic inequity, inequality, all of the things that perpetuate systems of lessened access in our community. With your help, whether it's to volunteer, to attend public programs, to spread the word, to get people to apply yourself, to donate, with your help, we can create a new generation of leaders in Harlem who are leading from a place of commitment to the legacy that was left here by our ancestors. We know that that contribution changed the world. So the world changes with us. Go to the website, Bard Microcolleges, read the website, and figure out your best role in moving us forward. Thank you to Max, thank you to DeAnna, thank you to Craig, thank you to the Public Library for embracing this project, and for everyone who helped us along the way. Thank you for believing in us.